Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of the Jetpack Trooper from Jedi Survivor, VC336.
Villa Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it.
Hello there, thanks for visiting Villa Varykino. A local New Zealand online retailer has been stocking the latest wave of Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figures. Interestingly, they've only been showing up on their website in batches of 2 or 3, and we've been grabbing as many as we can, which includes the incredible Jod Narnarwood figure from Skeleton Crew and the Ahsoka Tano Paradia version from the Ahsoka live action series. Really loving this wave, and I was able to grab 2 more just this morning. The Jetpack Trooper from Jedi Survivor and Grand Admiral Thrawn from the Ahsoka live action series. It was a bit of a toss-up, but I decided to open up the Jetpack Trooper first. I really like Trooper variants. This one's going to be a lot of fun. I can see some really unique details, and I love the Gaming Greats line. There's some really fun figures from the video game, so I can't wait to open this one up. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take a closer look at the figure with the accessories and the details, but first let's take a quick look at the packaging. The backing cards for the Vintage Collection line are heavily inspired by the original Kenner Star Wars action figure packaging from the 1970s and 80s. We have the Star Wars logo here at the top with the Jedi Survivor video game logo here in red, and a single chrome racetrack design surrounding the character art here on the right side. It's really fun seeing what character art they use for video game characters' action figures, because it's generally not a screen grab or screenshot from the video game. We get some really cool art of the characters, so this is some really fun artwork here. It looks pretty much like a standard Stormtrooper with some interesting details around on the chest, the jetpack of course, and the unique helmet there. We can also see the Trooper figure packaged here. It comes with one single blaster, an E11 accessory there, and we can see some of those unique details. I can't wait to get this one out of the packaging. For the Jetpack Trooper, we have a dark red accent color used for the nameplate here with a white font reading simply Jetpack Trooper, and also that dark red color in behind the figure. This one's going to be fun. I do have a recently reissued Stormtrooper figure just for a little bit of a comparison once I get this one out of the packaging. Moving on to the back of the backing card, you can see this is the modern style for the Vintage Collection back here, where we have the accent color used across the top half of the backing card and that pale grey across the bottom there with the Vintage Collection logo here as well. We've got an insert of the front of the backing card here with the figure posed out of the packaging in front so we can get a better look at the accessories. We can also see that interesting shoulder detail, which is a little bit hidden in the character art on the front of the backing card. This one is VC336 as noted here on the top right, and we do have a little bit of a blurb about the Jetpack Trooper. Jetpack Troopers can navigate otherwise impassable terrain with their short-ranged booster packs. Their specialized training and equipment give them superiority over most entrenched infantry positions. So, not spoilery for the video game, just a little bit of an introduction to them as a interesting Stormtrooper variant there. Now, one thing that I think is really interesting about this one is, of course, Jedi Survivor is a video game, and generally speaking, I always think of that as being part of the Gaming Greats line, but you can see, compared to this older figure from Jedi Fallen Order, that the newer figures no longer feature the Gaming Greats logo on either the front or the back of the backing cards. Perhaps this means that Hasbro sees them as more of a mainline figure than this kind of subline featuring characters from the video games. As a video game fan, especially of Star Wars video games, I'm very happy to see more characters from the video games coming through in action figure form. It felt back in the Outcast days, the Jedi Academy days, it was really hard to find anything related to Star Wars video games in the merchandise line. So I'm really happy to see some really cool characters from the video games coming through in the mainline action figure line. Now, of course, I do actually have Cal Kestis himself from Jedi Survivor, but he was by himself, so I kept him on his backing card until I had some cool characters to pose with him. So now I've got the Jetpack Trooper. I'm probably going to be opening up my Cal Kestis Vintage Collection figure very shortly. Can't wait to get these two side by side on my display. But for now, let's open up the Jetpack Trooper. So now I have the Jetpack Trooper out of the packaging as well as the E11 blaster rifle accessory. So let's take a closer look. So of course, this is pretty much a standard Stormtrooper 3.75-inch action figure with some really cool variations. I really like Trooper variations, and of course there are some really fun ones in the Star Wars video games. The tubes here and this box at the front is very reminiscent of TIE pilots. I think that's quite fun. And of course we've got this really interesting sort of jetpack here on the back. So as usual, I'm going to start with the head and go all the way down. Now for this trooper, like most Stormtroopers, there isn't a head underneath. It is just the helmet accessory on the top. And there is some really cool extra additions here. Of course, a regular Stormtrooper doesn't have this crest detail. It kind of reminds me of the, classic clone trooper design there with this raised crest. We've got a yellow stripe there. For the most part, the rest of the details are very iconic classic Stormtrooper. The green lenses on the eye section here is quite prominent. Now, of course, the original Stormtrooper lenses were actually dark green, but on most action figures, it doesn't really come through much. The most recent vintage collection classic Stormtrooper from A New Hope does actually have dark green lenses, but I feel like the ones here are just a little bit more evidently green. I can really sort of see the green color there, but we've still got the same other details. We've got the dark gray frown here, a black stripe, the blue tube stripes here, and some of those other gray details there. I have to say, when looking at this one in person, the helmet color is just a slightly different, sort of slightly warmer white plastic compared to the white of the actual armor. Probably doesn't show up on camera. It's just very subtle in person. It's just the white here, a little bit different to the white of the armor there. But of course, sometimes different manufacturing processes, slightly different batches of plastic give a slightly different effect there. But overall, quite nice paint here on the trooper. The one thing that I will note is perhaps we've just got the tiniest little bit of green, sort of just a little bit sort of extending beyond the sculpting lines for the left eye lens here compared to on the right side. It just has a little bit more of a green halo under the lens. Very small, very minor. It's not really a flaw or anything like that. Just sort of caught my eye there. Now, I do have to mention, of course, we've got the jetpack here on the back, and it did come attached in the box, but you can take it off. It's kind of funny. It does look just like a standard Stormtrooper backplate here with that sort of half circle, sort of crescent cutout shape there. We do have a decent sized peg sort of stick here, so it does slot in quite well. It is easy to remove, just kind of wiggles out, but at least it's not too prone to sort of falling out, which is always annoying when I find that the backpacks and jetpacks of our characters don't really want to stay in place. This one is really nice. Got a little bit of a wiggle there. It is very light. There's not much plastic to it. It is a sturdy plastic. It doesn't feel rubbery. We've got some nice sculpting lines here on the back with some nice metallic silver accents there. Not too complicated. Just sort of does the trick, doesn't it? But of course, it just does kind of look like somebody just kind of cut a hole in the back of a Stormtrooper figure there. I'm probably just going to leave this one off there for now because it's a little bit easier to hold. Now, of course, we've got this really cool sort of TIE pilot-esque sort of little breathing box here. Now on sort of certain other trooper variants, this is sort of mounted to the chest in a bit more of a permanent fashion. This one is sort of floating around. You can see we've got sort of a bit of a scoop in the underside there. It's a little bit sort of hollowed out. It doesn't look quite as sort of realistic there with that sort of scoop out shape, but it does fit. Like if you wanted to fix it down there, it does actually kind of match up to the chest plate quite nicely. Still looks quite good there from the front, but in terms of the actual figure, it is floating around, which means we can move the head quite freely. It's not restricting there. Now, I'm not going to tug on it too firmly, but the tubes do look like they are separate pieces that have been attached to the helmet, so I'm not going to test to see how firmly they are attached or whether they can be removed. But other than that, we've got some really nice painted details, some tiny yellow, and I think that's black there at the top. We've got some black and red buttons and markings here on the front, some nice painted details. Just sort of adds it, because of course it's really central across the front. I do want to see some really nice painted details there, so that's very nice to see. So the other major difference from a classic Stormtrooper is, of course, we've got this left shoulder section here, this shoulder bell armor piece, which is a light gray. So we can see that we still have that midline sort of ridge seam there on this one here as well. So it's pretty much the same shoulder shoulder piece as on the other side, but it is now grey with the classic Imperial cog symbol there printed in black. Now, of course, this is where digital printing really shines. Rather than that being sort of a smudgy, somewhat of a circle symbol there, we've got a nice, very crisp printed detail there, even over that ridge. It reads very nice. That's really fun to see. So, of course, if we lift that part up, it does look like a fairly standard Stormtrooper with that interesting shoulder piece. So if you want to, you could probably pull this helmet off because it just has that standard sort of Stormtrooper helmet attachment point. You could pop this helmet off and swap it with a standard one if you want to sort of mix up your ranks and just have something interesting with this sort of different shoulder piece there. Of course, we do have that gap there in the back, but if you are like me, most of your figures are facing forward, so you probably wouldn't even notice. So there's a little bit of an interesting sort of variation there. So for the most part, this does look very similar at first glance to the recently released, well, re-released VC336, that iconic and New Hope Stormtrooper that was recently reissued in that fantastic wave of A New Hope character figures. There were some absolute standout figures in that wave, and I really like the Stormtrooper. So to do a little bit more of sort of a thorough analysis of this particular figure, I just wanted to see how closely it resembles that original Stormtrooper. So this one I have on hand here. This is VC236, the 2024 reissue. I absolutely love this figure. Just a quick recap, of course, we've got some really nice details. We've got the thermal detonator painted there on the back. We've got that sort of slightly rubbery holster here in the black, and we've got that really subtle dark green lenses here on the helmet detail there. And of course, we also have an E11 accessory there. So let's take a quick little look, because I'm fairly certain that they're probably going to have some reused pieces here. So starting up from the bottom, the boots, the shins, and the thighs, I'm pretty certain are the same pieces. They look pretty close, especially in person. I can see all the sort of the sculpting lines and the details. Now going up to the belt, I can actually see some differences. So this is really interesting. I thought for the most part we might just have pretty much the same. Even the helmet might be very similar, just with some additions there, but in terms of the helmet, it might, I'm fairly certain it's very similar, but the plastic color, I wonder if this is going to show up. The plastic color of the two helmets, this one's just a little bit more of a true white and a good match to the armor. This one is slightly warmer in terms of the color match there, but on camera it's probably not going to show up. But what is really standing out to me is the belt differences. So of course this one does have a holster. We can see that sort of, so that the belt is made out of the rubbery plastic, because the drop boxes, these little sort of sections here, are also rubbery. So the belt section is all in one piece, and it is cast out of that rubbery plastic there, extending down to sort of the back rear armor plate here, and also the thermal detonator. The thermal detonator on the back of this one is unpainted. We don't have those gray details there, and we also don't have a holster on this one. So the back plate here is just a little bit different, but I can still feel that it is that rubbery plastic. I can sort of feel it here. Now we do have a little bit of an attachment point here, because it's not quite hidden by the holster that we have on this figure. So I can just sort of see where that piece is kind of supposed to be just tucked under there. But of course that's on the back. It's just a little bit sort of, I'm sure it's going to wiggle around when I take out the articulation. We can see that that cutout there in that back plate really does look like they've just cut it, because we can see the remnants of the sculpted details of the original one there. But checking out, I'm just going to take his E11 blaster out there just so we can get a better look at the ab plate and the belt, because I think we've got some differences here. So the one thing that caught my eye initially first was the size of the belt boxes, the drop boxes. We've got very small drop boxes on the Jetpack Trooper. They're much thinner. This one is actually angled towards the front. You can see that curve there. We've also got a bit of a front leaning curve on this one here. They are quite small compared to the drop boxes on the A New Hope Stormtrooper here. Quite interesting to see, but a closer look, the actual sculpting on the belt feels different. This one has much sort of thicker in terms of the width, these sort of box shapes on the belt. This one has very narrow box shapes there. I feel like that is a different sculpt. Now looking at the ab section here, It does look pretty much the same. Of course, we've just got a very subtle variation in terms of the button colors. We've got 3 blue ones here alongside the grey buttons on the A New Hope Stormtrooper. This Jetpack Trooper is just grey, which I feel that matches up to the shoulder piece quite nicely in terms of the design. Now, just taking a quick look at the chest, that also looks pretty much the same, and the arms, I just get this one down. I'm pretty sure we see a lot of reused parts, which, considering that we want Stormtroopers to look the same on our display shelf, that does make a lot of sense. Now, something that actually sort of caught my eye just as sort of moving these figures around, this is my original A New Hope one that came out earlier this year. And the painting on this one, it's a little bit hard to see. The painting on the black sort of ribbed under section was never quite the tidiest. We have some sections there where the black didn't cover the paintings of that sort of ribbed section all the way completely. Holding this one, that is the tidiest painting I have ever seen on the Stormtrooper undersuit rib section. I had to sort of play around with the seaming just when I got it straight out of the packet, because that looks like a separate piece. That is so clean going all the way in there. I thought for a minute maybe they had made a separate sort of white armor piece to go over the black sculpting underneath, because of just how tidy that is, especially considering the paint that we have on this one. You can kind of see some of those sections where it just got a little bit messy, but this is so lovely and clean. Of course, there's such a stark color tone difference between the black and white of Stormtroopers. I want to see some really clean lines, and this figure is just fantastic. I love how sharp all of these edges are. Really, really nice. So cool. So if you're perhaps, not a fan of so many sort of different additions there, you could probably swap the helmets on these 2 figures and have one with that extra sort of different shoulder piece there. But they look really cool. So interesting that there are some different pieces here in terms of the belt, and of course the helmet on this one, and just the painting on the shoulder piece. So I'm assuming that because most of the parts are the same, that we're going to have the same level of articulation. But before I get into that, I just want to take a quick look at the blasters, and hopefully I won't mix them up. So this is the E11 blaster accessory that came with the Jetpack Trooper. The same level of detail that we come to expect. It's a pretty common accessory by modern standards, of course. Has a little bit of a flex to it. It's not too brittle, not too bendy there, but of course if you do have it in a bit of an extended sort of curve shape, it's possibly going to take on that curve over time. I do try and keep my accessories as straight as I can. Now this is the one that came with the reissue Stormtrooper A New Hope, and I have to say, we can see just a few differences. This one has sort of the extra little accessory, sort of the little scope detail here on the side, which is not present on this one. So there is a difference there. But I have to say, I like the sculpting detail on this one. It just comes across as a little bit cleaner in terms of the sort of a section here. Very hard to show on black details, but something about the casting of this one, it just comes across a little bit more crisp compared to the one that came with the A New Hope Trooper. This one is also bendier. I think this one just feels perhaps a little bit more bendier. Yeah, this one's just a little bit firmer, which is quite nice. I think that one's going to hold up a little bit better just in terms of the details. You can just kind of see this one just feels a little bit crisper. So again, maybe that is an accessory you might want to swap out to kind of create the ultimate Stormtrooper accessory. I love this figure, but yeah, I gotta say, I kind of like the blaster rifle. I know this one, is different because we've got that extra little element there. So I'm just going to pop the Stormtrooper off to the side, because let's check out the articulation of this one. So very free with the helmet, which of course is nice to see. It's going to look a little bit odd if you turn him too much to the side, because of course that chest box is now a little bit askew. I kind of think he looks a little bit better if it's lined up, even if it's not completely touching, but it does look just a little bit better, especially from the front. So the shoulder bells are quite interesting on the Troopers. Unlike some characters where they're kind of separate and floating around, they are attached. So curious to see if this is really going to limit. I think he might not be able to lift his arms up sort of in there, sort of up to the side, because that is kind of limiting, but we can rotate all the way around. I get the feeling it's just trying not to be too rough here, but I don't think he's really going to lift his arm up. because of where that shoulder detail is there. Just in terms of that kind of movement, it's hitting there, and it doesn't really feel like it's going to move much. But let's test out the elbows. So of course we've got black on black. It does a pretty good job of hiding the sort of articulation around the joints, but for the Stormtroopers, the elbows do look a little bit small compared to the size of the shoulder armor. I have to say, just a little bit more bulk, particularly when they're in this bent position. Might have done a little bit of a better job just in sort of keeping that sort of realistic scale there. The elbows looking very small in relation to the hand, but that's just to my eye there. So we have got some good sculpting here for the black gloves. We've got a very extended trigger finger here on the right hand, which is quite nice there. That should fit into the E11 sort of trigger guard nicely there. And on the left hand, we have the fingers all sculpted together. No extended trigger finger here on the left. Of course, we generally do see the Stormtroopers holding their blaster rifles all in the same orientation, so that should fit very well into that hand. So in terms of how well my figure is moving straight out of the packaging, I'm not having any issues. Sometimes with the figures, especially in the smaller 3.75 inch scale, the articulation, particularly in those very small arm joins, can be quite tough. I'm having no problems moving this here. You can see that really nice sculpting detail there in the forearms. You know, Hasbro and Kenner have been making action figures of Stormtroopers for decades now. We're really getting to sort of the finesse level there with terms of the articulation, the scale. Of course, you know, everyone wants to make sure their Stormtroopers look as accurate to on screen as possible, and I think we're getting just some absolutely fantastic replication there. Of course, this one is from a video game, not as on screen from the original trilogy, but still, of course, from the neck down, very, very similar. So we've also got that mid-torso articulation here, just above that ab plate. Very nicely hidden in terms of sort of just underneath that chest box there. Stormtrooper armor feels like it was designed for the articulation of action figures. It works really well. So really nice movement here. He can bend, he can flex around at that midline section. Nothing is really clicking or getting stuck there like some figures do. I do find some kind of snap back to midline. He is moving very, very nicely through that middle section there. So I know that the articulation on some modern figures is using a slightly different articulation model, but I think this one is still using the original Stormtrooper leg mold in the way that I can turn the legs. So of course, Stormtrooper armor very high here at the front of the leg, which is going to restrict how high we can kick the legs. So turning the thigh to the side a little bit, I can see that we've got that articulation sort of swivel point. It's a little bit hard to show because it's black on black in terms of the undersuit there, but we can sort of swivel that thigh around. It's really hard to show. You can kind of see it here in the back a little bit there, just hidden underneath that thigh armor there. Really nice. So of course we can rotate on my particular figure. It wants to rotate at the hip as well, but we've got that extra articulation point. So now I can finally get this one to flex here a little bit. This one is just a little bit stiff on me. There we go. We can sort of see some of the articulation there in the inner thigh section there. So I don't think this is the modern style. It does look very similar to my original Stormtrooper, but we do still get some pretty good articulation there. I don't think of Stormtroopers as kicking a lot, but it does help to have a good range of motion in the lower legs, particularly if you want to do some sort of crouching or kneeling sort of while aiming positions there. Generally, my Stormtroopers are standing upright. I'm not so great at posing them. Now, of course, we do have these little rubbery drop boxes, but they are pretty flexible. They're not really getting in the way much there, which is nice to see. And I always find that the black undersuit of Stormtrooper figures is very good for hiding articulation. I can just make out the two different plastics used there. One is just a little bit glossier than the one next to it, but because it's black on black, it hides there very well. And again, also at the knee. Now, I know the ribbed sort of undersuit isn't technically accurate to the original trilogy that was introduced in the modern era with Rogue One, of course, but we have the modern video games, so of course we can sort of play with that. So We are using the modern ribbed undersuit here for the Jedi Survivor video game Stormtrooper. So we can see that ribbed texture there on the knee. Again, the knee is a little bit skinny, particularly viewed from the front, but I'm not going to be bending my knees quite that much. It does work a little bit better on some of the other characters that have a knee pad that kind of hides down over the join there. But I gotta say, I do like that angle. It's quite a good kick towards the back there. And oh, very nice there on the ankles there as well. We've got that black on there on the sole. We can see that peg there for attaching to a stand. So lots of articulation, of flexibility there in the legs. Oh, just got a little bit there where you can see where the black paint hasn't completely covered the white plastic there. I can see that just when I've got that knee all the way bent. It's a little bit visible there from the front. But if I get it to about there, I'm not going to see it. Of course, that kneecap is doing a pretty good job. That the knee of the shin armor there doing a pretty good job of hiding that until I get that sort of really deeper flex there. But he feels really nice. I like the level of movement I'm getting. He doesn't feel too tight. I get nervous when my action figures feel like they're fighting me in terms of the stiffness. There are a couple of angles in terms of I can't see because I'm trying to make sure that I don't break my figures, but the arms don't feel like they want to go out to the side on my particular figure. I feel like they should, but something about this is being very tight. So this one in particular is just rotating them up to the side. He feels like he should, but it's just completely hitting there. Very tight on the shoulders on this particular figure. I'm not really game to really test that one. And you can see just how easily this figure is actually tipping to the side as I'm trying to sort of see if I can get his arms to raise to the side. But my particular figure is being quite tight in that particular it's just the articulation movement there. He just doesn't want to. So let's test out how well he's going to hold the E11 blaster here. So I'm hoping we've got that enclosed trigger guard, that finger is going to go in there really nicely. We've got a little bit of a wiggle here with the fingers, of course. Yep, that went in quite nicely. So black on black, always a little bit hard to show. Hopefully you can see the figure holding on to the blaster quite nicely there. So of course, we've got a chest box in the way. So holding on to an E11 blaster with two hands might be a little bit tricky, but we'll see how well we can go because I do like that particular pose. So on this figure, oh, okay. I didn't spot that before because it's black on black. We do have a little bit of plastic flashing where you get that little bit of extra plastic. It's just sitting in the hand. It's not thick. It's just a little bit, kind of almost like a little bit of plastic paper. You can kind of see it sitting in there. Just that little bit of extra plastic. You can kind of see, I can kind of flick it there. But hopefully that's not actually going to get in the way of holding on to the blaster rifle. So if I can get his hand. Okay, there. That wasn't too hard. Cool. That looks cool. So it's actually got a reasonable amount of clearance there with the chest box. That's not getting too much in the way. I was really hoping we could get him into a good pose. Now, generally I do spend quite a lot of time working on my poses. I want my figures to look cool and actually stand up quite stable before I sort of add them to my permanent display. But just for now, just wanted to take a quick little look. He needs a little bit of work there, but I think he looks pretty cool holding on to that E11 blaster rifle. Doesn't look too awkward. I thought he might sort of have to hold it way out in front of his body to get past that chest box. Of course, Stormtroopers don't have that element, but he looks pretty cool. Very nice. I'm really liking the colors on this one. So let's get his jetpack on. And now we've got him all together. So I know that the video game ones might not be in every collector's sort of wish list. You know, they might be sort of selecting the live action or perhaps the TV and movies. But I really like the video games. We get some really fun variations. It makes me very nostalgic for the older expanded universe. I was loving when we finally got some of those video game figures, that early Battlefront one that came with that special card. I think it was a Biker Scout. I loved loved that figure. It was so exciting to see Battlefront action figures, even though it was pretty much a standard trooper figure. And now we're getting so many cool toys from the modern era of Star Wars video games. As a long-time player of Star Wars video games, this is really cool, you know, just having a bit of fun with different trooper variants as we see them in the video games. He's a little bit unsteady because I've played with all his articulation points. I will spend a little bit of time, but I do like how easily I can move his joints, with the exception of sort of moving his arms out to the side. I'm not quite sure why I can't get that one to go in that position. This one I think has the same sort of, this one, I can get them out to the side. This one is being very tight on me, and I can't get them to go into this position. So I'm going to have to work on that, because if it's the same mold, it should be able to do it as easily as this one can. But for some reason, the joint on my one is very stiff, which is interesting. But for the pose that I want to get him into, holding the blaster rifle just at the side, like with two hands, is quite good. So this one's a little bit out of shape because I've played with his articulation, but really fun. And I kind of want to build up a bit of an army of these guys. I think they look really cool. Just new arriving in New Zealand, so I just grabbed the one for now, but I really like the details, the paintwork on it, the detail. I really like the sculpting line on the belt. Something about the sort of the tight, crisp lines on the belt feels a little bit more, I don't know, something about it reads a little cleaner than the belt on this one. I know that this one's probably not an accurate belt for a New Hope Stormtrooper, but it reads very clean on this particular figure, which I really like. Just those tiny little notes of the tiny amount of green below the left lens on this one. It just gives it that tiny bit of a haze. Very minimal, but I do like the fact that we've got green lenses, much like this version here. And yeah, it wasn't anything that was really catching my eye, because of course I had to buy this one online. I didn't get to check the figure and the backing card before I purchased. It's always a little bit nervous when these things arrive in the mail, crossing your fingers, making sure that they're all good. I do like to keep my backing card, so thankfully that arrived safely as well. And now I have a new Jetpack Trooper to add to my lineup. So now I'm going to have to open up Cal Kestis very soon so I can add them to my video game lineup of figures. These look really cool. I need more troopers for my display. You always got to have a good group of them, don't you? So this one looks really fun. He's standing, this one's a little bit not quite the same height because I've made him lean a little bit, but you gotta love Stormtroopers. You know, they're so fun to army build, and this one looks really cool. So a really exciting new opening to add to my vintage collection lineup of Stormtrooper figures. There's so many fun variations now with all of the video games and expanded universe and comics and all of that kind of stuff. So iconic, really fun to open this one up. So there we go. This was a lot of fun opening up a brand new figure on the day that I got them. Really fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up a new vintage collection 3.75-inch action figure and checked out the details and had a lot of fun. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I recently opened up the Mandalorian Imperial base figure, VC312A. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.